Good morning. Good morning, and good morning online. Good to see everybody. I'm glad that you're here. If you're new to our class, we have a discussion time, and then as people drop off their family, they come and join us. But in order to make the most of it, I'll encourage in a moment discussion, and you might invite someone to be at your table so they can enjoy that discussion. When my wife and I moved to a little town in Ohio, Byesville, I don't know what comes to your mind when you hear the word Byesville, right? If you've driven I-70 all the way through Ohio to West Virginia, you drove through it, but you might have missed it, you know. Byesville, to add some context, is in Guernsey County. So now what's coming to your mind, right? If I said I was born in Brooklyn, you don't get the same vibe as if I was born in Byesville. You don't. And we know this. Our kids moved to Arkansas, to Conway, and they don't live very far from Toadsuck, Arkansas. And some of you know this. You know of Toadsuck, Arkansas. But if you said, I'm from Toadsuck, that doesn't sound the same as saying, I was born outside of D.C., right? We know there's a difference. If someone says, hey, where are you from? Oh, good grief, I'm from North Dakota. That doesn't sound the same as someone says, oh, I'm from Virginia. And we all know this because we know there's context. And when you start thinking about how we introduce ourselves and we start getting to know each other. And I'm thinking about a few people in the room right now as you sit for, lunch or dinner or breakfast and, where are you from? And that starts a conversation and then people start trying to explain it. If someone says, I'm from Chicago, they just don't do a ton of explaining. But if someone says, right, well, I'm from, Chickasaw, Oklahoma, they do a little more explaining. And the reason for that is because we know that those words carry weight. So when a young man had met Jesus and was super enthusiastic about meeting Jesus, so he goes to his best friend and he says, man, we found the Messiah, Jesus of Nazareth. And that just ruins the whole conversation in one word, because then his best friend says, oh, brother, can anything good come out of Nazareth? We know how those terms function. Agreed? We know how they function. But they also function another way. And that is that what we grow up with is what we know. So Susan and I moved in 1984 in February. We moved to Byesville, Ohio. A small community in Guernsey County, Ohio, southeast Ohio, and we met a couple of families. One of them were the Millers, and this, Moore, M-O-O-R-E, I apologize for that, Moore, and the father's name was Glenn Moore. And then we met another family, the Archers, okay, these two families. And within the first 6 months of us living there, they both had children. When we moved there, the women were pregnant, but so was Susan. So it was, kind of an awakening, right? Like we're all kind of doing the same thing, kind of. But those two families, the sons that were born to them, both had Down syndrome. So one of them was Glenn Jr., right? And one of them was Joshua. Right, Joshua Archer. Now, Joshua was actually the second son in his family. So he had a brother named Jeremy Archer, okay? But in the Moore family, they had one son, Glenn, and then did they adopt later, way later? Or is that his brother? Okay, sorry about that. I was doing a little quick check on that. So when we thought about it, both families were starting something fresh. But I thought about Jeremy. So Jeremy was a few years old when his brother Josh was born. But Jeremy has no living memory of not having a brother, Joshua, who has Down syndrome. Jeremy has no living memory of that because he was, like 2 when his brother was born. So he has no living memory of that. So his whole life, he grew up in a family unit where one of the family members had Down syndrome. So as Jeremy grows up, he doesn't know life apart from that context. That's the life he knows. We have families at this church who have a similar experience. Another family at our church, Phil and Lisa Woody, okay? So Phil and Lisa have 2 children, and a lot of you know one of them, Evan, okay? And Evan's 26 years old, goes to church here. He has an older sister, Emily, okay? And Emily actually is a doctor, and she's finishing all of that residency stuff right now, but she's amazing. So we met them 28 years ago, and Emily was going to our preschool because they live right across the street, okay? But then one day we get a call, and Evan had fallen at home. So he's about 18 months old. He fell at home, and I don't know your experience, but a lot of children fall. And he did. He hit his head, but it didn't appear to be significant until a little later. And then a little bit of a malaise, a little bit of a slowness to his reactions. They rushed him to the hospital, and the result was a traumatic brain injury, okay, at around 18 months old. His sister can remember some of life, not a ton, but some of life prior to the traumatic brain injury. Some of life. But the bulk of her life, from preschool on, was her being the older sister to a little brother who had a traumatic brain injury, which is still the case, obviously to this day, right? So when she was in school and she got interested in George, and some of you know her husband, George. He's, a basketball player for Lipscomb University, and I'm not exaggerating because I did their wedding. Do you, and then it was do you, And George is just a dream. But the big thing was, does George know how to be with Evan? Because I'm not going to marry somebody who doesn't know how to be with my little brother. You get it, right? I'm just not going to do that. So there were a lot of guys interested in Emily, but they didn't ring the bell. The meter didn't go up into the green. But with George it did. And George knows how to love Evan, which means that he also knew something about how to love Emily. Does this all kind of make sense so far? Okay. So actually, there are people in the world who know how to indicate to others that you'd be safe with me. You'd be respected with me. You don't have to have your guard up with me. And then there are other people, and we all know this is true, where the longer we're around them, the more guard goes up. Can you relate to that? When I was a kid, there was a show that would come on called Get Smart. And the main guy was Maxwell Smart. And the way that the show opened was him going down this tunnel, and door after security 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 door, right? And so the whole idea here is, this scene of door after door after door after door after door. But when he leaves, it's shut after shut after shut after shut after shut after shut. And so we know sometimes when we meet someone that our security door is hovering a little bit. But then our interaction, the doors relax. But we know those other people that the security door hovers a little bit, and a few more seconds in, am I right? Okay. So think about the life of Jesus, and you're a father whose son responds similar to how we see someone who is suffering from an epileptic outburst. And people don't like being around his son. And there's another family who lives up by Galilee, and they've got an adult son that the way the Bible describes him is he's just full of a legion of demons. So people have actually banished him to a cemetery, to live in a cemetery. And they try to chain him down. See, he has a family, and we know this because the Bible actually says he has a family. Jesus tells him to go home to his family. So he has a family, right? And then there's this other lady who for 12 years has not been able to stop her bleeding. And in those days, we didn't have some of the things available that we have now. And so that bleeding was hard to hide, impossible to hide. And for 12 years, she's on the outskirts of society for a physical condition she just can't do anything about. But people don't want her around, and they don't even want to touch her. But Jesus, he marches right up to the dad with the son who's in a mess. He gets in a boat, sails across the Sea of Galilee, jumps out of the boat, and goes and meets this guy that's living in a cemetery, right? They're in a big crowd, and the lady with the issue of blood touches Jesus. Jesus says, "Stop! I got to know who touched me." The disciples keep moving. But what Jesus is doing over and over and over and over again is he's not just reaching out to people. He's showing his disciples, you don't have to go through life pushing people away that you don't know what to do with. Okay, how are we doing so far? So now what I want you to do is at your tables, I just want you to share some of your own experiences of being around people, whether you were young or today, who are a little different, and either it makes you a little nervous or you can tell it makes others a little nervous. And just share your experience. What has that been like for you? What has it been like for you? You notice I've given you several examples to work from. Okay? They're not all the same. But I just want you to think about it. What has it been like for you to be around people that made you a little nervous or that you noticed made other people a little nervous? What has that been like for you? What has that experience been like? How have you felt? How were you at one time? How are you now? How have those experiences changed you or impacted you? Right? So what I'd like for you to do, if you're not at a table, go ahead and join a table. And then if you'd like to invite someone to your table, please do that, okay? But what is the question again? What has it been like for you to be around someone that makes you a little bit nervous or people that make you a little bit nervous, or you can tell that they make other people nervous? And what has it been like for you? How would you describe your experiences? Okay? So I'm going to give you some time to visit about that. All right, let's add a little bit to the discussion. What are some circumstances that traditionally make us uncomfortable? So I'm going to talk bluntly for a minute, but they're not things you don't know. Okay, I'm just going to talk bluntly, but I know you already know this. One of the things that makes us uncomfortable is smell. And it does. Now, there's a ton of research behind this, and fascinating enough, of our 5 recognized physical senses, I know there's arguments about that, but of the 5 that we kind of grew up learning, the olfactory sense, which is our sense of smell, is the closest tied to memory. Memory. And so there are smells that if we grow up with them, they can either be pleasing or repugnant, one of the two. But when we grow up later in life, we'll have the same experience if and when we meet someone where their food, their presence, their dwelling, whatever it is, has a smell that is unpleasing to us. So it's very common. So what I want to see is just a show of hands of anyone that has experienced that in life. Okay, right? So this is general, but we know what that means, right? A second thing has to do with bodily fluid, right? One of the things that is challenging for some people when they are committed to visitation, like the gift of visitation, service of visitation. Sometimes when you visit people who are in difficult physical circumstances, you know, they might have, they might be drooling or something like that. And, you know, it's very emotional. But, man, you know, Susan and I have encountered so many people that just have such a gift in those moments. It is honestly like nothing bothers them. At least it feels like that nothing bothers them. And there's so much dignity in how they care for people. But how many of you have experienced something like that, right? The bodily fluids. When we recognized that Susan's dad was going to need assistance with some larger issues of life, okay? When my dad encountered that, many of you will remember, he passed away suddenly. He went into the hospital one day and died 13 days later. We didn't even know he was sick. So yes, I had to help him with bodily functions, but it quickly dissolved into something that was very different than what we had anticipated. But with her dad, him coming home from the hospital, choosing home hospice versus a living center, you know, we kind of knew, well, we're it. And we had already practiced the speech on my dad. So there we were, I think it was December 29th of 2022, and we're there at the house. It's late at night, and Susan and I and her sister are there at Walt's bed. And I just looked at Walt, and I said, Walt, I said, there's a whole bunch of things that you've done your entire life by yourself that are now a team effort. Remember? And I said, and you're looking at your team. That is exactly what I said to him. I said, are you okay with that? And Walt just said, yes. Because he was a very decisive guy, right? Yes. But then I got to watch Susan, right over here. Raise your hand for those that don't know you yet. My wife, Susan. I got to watch her live that for the next 10 months. And I told you I was going to be blunt. You know, that includes cleaning him up after he uses the restroom. Right? But I'm watching her do it with such dignity that no matter what the smell or the scene, nothing changes in her face. You know the micro movements of our bodies? You know how I see it. You know the micro movements. But I'm watching her, and the micro movements don't change because there's a well of desire within her for his dignity. You get where that's going? Does that language resonate with you? The well of desire within for his dignity, right? So in her mind, whatever, and I know this is going to be awful, but I told you twice now I was going to be blunt. Whatever was coming out of him was smaller than what was already in her for him. I'm trying to keep this real. I'm trying to keep it real. So when you think about Jesus, okay, now you get where the connection. When he's with the dad, whose son is, foaming at the mouth. You remember the scene there in the book of Mark as it's described, and, his son is foaming at the mouth. Well, you know that this dad is used to all these people where their faces blanch, their bodies, twitch, people turn, they move, people don't want to be around them, they make a wide berth, you know what I mean? And I'm not picking at anybody because I've been that person. I've been the person who didn't know what to do. Have you? I've been the person who didn't know what to do and stood there and stared or moved or changed an aisle in a grocery store because I was unfamiliar. I didn't know what to do, right? And I could feel as bad as I want to feel about it, or I could learn what to do. Put myself in some situations that would challenge me, okay? When the woman who had the issue of blood, do you remember what she said? I'm going to translate. Remember she said, if I can just touch the hem of his garment, her life has become for 12 years a science of being inconspicuous. It's the science for this woman. How do I not draw any attention to myself? And Jesus says, but you deserve attention. You shouldn't live like this. In a world that I would create, I wouldn't want people to live like that. How are we doing? So a friend in this room, one day I see this friend who's in this room, and I see him driving out of the church parking lot with a member of our church who is nonverbal. Okay, not a relative, it's a person in our church, a person in our church, who I already know is nonverbal, and I'm like, well, I wonder where they're going. Because they're driving out by themselves. This person who's nonverbal, that person's parents are not with them. And there's no buffer. So, what are you going to do? So I'm interested in this. Like, wait a minute, where are you going and what are you going to do when you get there? So in my personality, I just asked him. I was just like, hey, I've got a question. What happens? What do you do? And I asked. And part of the reason I asked is I don't like being the person that doesn't know how to get off the sideline. I don't like being that person. You know what I mean? I don't like being the person that's staring at something and doesn't know how to make another step. I don't like that. So I thought, well, I've got a Christian brother here who is showing me that for some reason he stepped into that, and I sure want to know why, and I want to know how it happened. Then I think about our whole church family, and I think churches do this. Churches have micro movements. Someone comes in, they're different, it's their clothes, it's their smell, it's their affect, it's how many tattoos they may or may not have, and we move with it. We have micro movements, and people feel them. So, let's turn to James, book of James. Okay, book of James. I think this will be good. Okay, go to James and turn to chapter 2. James 2. And when you get to James chapter 2, we'll read verses 1 through 13. James 2, 1 through 13. Do we have a microphone back there we can run around with? Joby, do you mind reading it if they bring you the mic? Okay, right here. Yep, right over here. Okay, so everybody, Joby is going to read it for us, but I would like for you to read along in your own Bible, okay? Okay, so James 2, 1 through 13.
My brothers and sisters, believers in our glorious Lord Jesus Christ, must not show favoritism. Suppose a man comes into your meeting wearing a gold ring and fine clothes, and a poor man in filthy old clothes also comes in. If you show special attention to the man wearing fine clothes and say, "Here's a good seat for you," but say to the poor man, "You stand there," or "Sit on the floor by my feet," have you not discriminated among yourselves and become judges with evil thoughts? Listen, my dear brothers and sisters, has not God chosen those who are poor in the eyes of the world to be rich in faith and to inherit the kingdom he promised those who love him? But you have dishonored the poor. Is it not the rich who are exploiting you? Are they not the ones who are dragging you into court? Are they not the ones who are blaspheming the noble name of him to whom you belong? If you really keep the royal law found in Scripture, love your neighbor as yourself, you are doing right. But if you show favoritism, you sin and are convicted by the law as lawbreakers. For whoever keeps the whole law and yet stumbles at just one point is guilty of breaking all of it. For he who said, "You shall not commit adultery," also said, "You shall not murder." If you do not commit adultery but do commit murder, you have become a lawbreaker. Speak and act as those who are going to be judged by the law that gives freedom, because judgment without mercy will be shown to anyone who has not been merciful. Mercy triumphs over judgment.
Isn't that great? This is one of the reasons, that you get so hooked on the Bible, is because you read something like that, and it's like, well, there it is. You know what to do now, right? It's so good, okay? So, I want to give you a couple things to process. So he says, it's church, right? And he says, so somebody comes in that you kind of know what to do with, like in a positive way. Ooh, they're rich. They can do something for us. That's impressive. I see they're wearing this, and that designer this, and this, and this, and this. And something is spurred within us that's like, ooh, wow, And then somebody else comes in, and it feels like we're going to have to stretch a little bit to care about them in the right way, and we don't feel all that up to stretching. Anybody else? Yes, this is the thing. So, it wasn't last week. The week before, I spoke at a teacher's in-service out of school for their in-service day. And I was the first person in the morning to speak. So I kind of told them a little bit about the story of my elementary life. And, in fifth grade, I had Miss Ginsbaugh. And Miss Ginsbaugh, she had a very low opinion of my present and my future, okay? And a lot of teacher conferences that year. And in fact, in one of them, my parents just actually pleaded with her to back off a little bit. Good grief, just back off a little. But the next year, day one, Miss Saubacher, sixth grade, I had a little bit of a change of heart. First day, she gets to my name. She reads my name out loud, taking roll first day. I'm sitting in the back. She's up front. I'm an M, so I'm in the middle when they do roll. And she stops in front of the whole class. She says, "Well, Mr. McLaughlin, I certainly hope you don't intend on acting this year like you did last year." Now, their classes were next door, Ginsbaugh and Saubacher, so I'm sure they talked about it, right? But when she said that, in my already immature mind, which was even more immature than a lot of people at that time, I just thought to myself, oh, I won't. I will be 10 times worse. Whatever I brought in here is out the door. We have switched gears, right? Completely switched gears. But some of them weren't like that. And they made me want to be something that I hoped I could be. I just didn't know how to get to it. And I think churches can kind of function like that, where we kind of reaffirm how unacceptable someone is in society, or we suggest to someone that like Jesus accepts us, Romans 15, we accept others. You know, we've experienced something with Jesus that we really want to pass along to others. And something I'm convinced of is this: if you can't love your neighbor, you will never love your enemy. So if the church doesn't know learn how to love each other, we'll have an incredibly difficult time loving the world. So this is a great place for us to learn how to do that. So here's what I want you to think about as we have a few minutes left. At your table, what are some really beautiful micro movements that church people can grow into that help people realize that they're safe and welcome? A micro movement is something not said from the stage. It's something it's an interaction. You know, it's a smaller movement. It's a word. It's a body posture. It's a engagement. So a micro movement is something smaller. What are some really special micro movements that you are aware of that help people feel safe and loved and accepted? Okay? I'll let you at it. I have a sneaking suspicion that we've landed on something really important. Because I'm watching these tables. Woo! I'd like to be at every single one of them. I got drawn in to watching you with each other. I thought, oh my goodness, I think we've landed on something important. That's what it feels like, is that we've landed on something really important. And I think that's why when Jesus was ready to leave this earth and hand off his mission, he didn't hand it off to a single person as his designee. Jesus handed it off to a body. Because it was going to take all of us to do what he wanted, not just one. One of us isn't going to be enough. But how many of you even feel just a little more equipped than when you walked in today? I know I do. Because you hear ideas and you're like, oh yeah, okay, I could do that. That'll be good, right? Or you hear yourself say something and it reminds you, yes, that's how I want to do that. Okay? So I know there's more conversations to be had, but we've run out of time for now. And so this might be a conversation you carry on afterward. If you are physically able and you have the time, we'd like your help with the chairs. We stack them and we put them over by that gray door. And it's optimum if they're in stacks of 8 or 9 for when we come back and set them up in the following week. Thank you all. Thank you for being here. And let's enjoy some fellowship. Stack the chairs and we'll go to worship together.